Welcome back to the Culture Centered Classroom podcast. Today is another amazing interview, another guest interview. And honestly, me and this guest have already been like chatting offline for, I don't even know, 45 minutes already. So we are warmed up. She's an amazing person. And I want to go ahead and introduce her. I'm going to read her bio and then I will bring her on to the show. So this is Courtney Morgan. She is an ESL teacher, coach, and course creator living near Asheville, North Carolina. She earned degrees in elementary education and multicultural education and is also national board certified in middle school grades for literacy. After 16 years as an elementary classroom teacher, Courtney shifted into her current teaching role to focus her efforts on supporting multilingual students. She founded the All Access Classroom to provide training that equips Gen Ed and ESL teachers to make grade level instruction accessible to multilingual learners. She loves advocating for culturally and linguistically diverse students and nurturing educators toward equitable practices in the classroom. So, hello, all the goodness, right? Like, I don't know if you're as excited as I am about this interview, but I think you're about to be. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Courtney on to the show. Hey, Courtney.
Hey, Jocelyn.
How are
Quite the
you?
introduction. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You'll have to pardon me. My voice is a little bit nasally. I'm kind of coming off of being a little sick, but I'm here. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yay. Well, I read your bio. So is there anything else though that you wanted to share about who you are and what, fuels your passion in education?
Yeah, I was in the elementary Gen Ed classroom as a classroom teacher for about 15 years, and I just loved it so much. And during that time, I did have my certification to teach ESL, but I just really enjoyed being in the classroom, having that classroom community and those relationships with the kids. But I really struggled when it came to knowing how to support the students in my class who were learning English. And I had had all these, experiences overseas and had just fallen in love with culture, just cultures in general, just getting to know people who are different from me. And I really had a heart for advocating for multilingual learners. But I really felt like I didn't have the tools yet to be able to do that effectively in my own classroom. And it was hard. It kind of, to my core, it was difficult. And so eventually my path led me to start as an ESL teacher. And one of my top priorities in my current position is to help Gen Ed teachers and other ESL teaching colleagues to know, how do you, when you're in the classroom, make that instruction accessible to them. So that's kind of, the core of what I do day to day in my job, as, in my public school teaching job, but also in my business and what I offer to help equip others who are struggling with similar things. So
Which is perfect because honestly, like that is something that I struggled with also. So when I was working on my master's, I I took like a few courses in was it called? I don't even know if I'm trying to think if it was an ESL program or whatever, but it was basically, 4 or 5 classes so that I could get like an ESL add-on.
mhm.
And those opened my eyes in so many different ways because I taught a ton of Mexican American students. And then I had a few students that had come over from like Colombia and Puerto Rico. And, I wanted to be able to connect with them in a meaningful way. But like you said, I didn't have the tools. And our ESL teacher was stretched to the max. So she really couldn't provide us with any additional support. And I feel like that because I had a heart for just learning and connecting with the students, that like I did okay. But it would have been amazing to have access to someone like you who can give these tips and strategies. And like, so if you do not know Courtney already, she, as I said, is the All Access Classroom, and that's her handle on Instagram. And I absolutely love watching your Instagram. Like I love the reels that you post. You do a is it a Tuesday try it or a Thursday try it?
Tuesdays.
Tuesday try it. Okay, that's what I
Uh-huh.
thought. So, so like on your Tuesday chat, you always have these very like practical strategies and tips for how all teachers, but I think it's so important for gen ed teachers to figure out how we can connect with our students. And so before you share some of your strategies, because I do want you to share, I want to just point out that you shared with me that like as far as your upbringing, you felt like it was very not necessarily limiting, but I don't know, like talk to me about how you were raised.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I I grew up in a fairly affluent white Christian society and had everything that I needed and things came to me fairly easily and I was good in school and had all the high expectations for achievement that come with that culture that I was in and it was an amazing childhood. But as you said, I was somewhat limited, shall we say, in my perspective of how other cultures and other people groups lived. And I think I was aware of that even
Mm,
as I was growing up. And to the point that when I hit college, I was ready to travel and get out of there and see the world. And so I started doing quite a few service trips overseas during my summer breaks. And at that point, I knew also that I had felt called to be a teacher. And the bonus of that was, oh goodness, that means I'm gonna have all my summers too to get to have these experiences in other places. And I did. I just fully embraced that and took some longer term trips where I was able to really be embedded in unique cultures and have relationships established with some amazing, beautiful people who really enlightened me and opened my mind to um, the strengths and gifts and skills that people can have who are very different from me. And it just completely changed my life. And so, then entering into my teaching profession, I took all that into my career with me and it changed how I related to my students. It changed how I advocated for them. And it has continued to grow and grow today, to the point that I'm willing to put in a lot of time and effort in my desire to help others who are teaching, perhaps with a similar, just a perspective that hasn't blossomed yet. I always try to see things with my growth mindset. We're just not there yet. I see every colleague, every educator as someone um, who, as I assume, has positive intentions and positive goals in mind, but perhaps just needs information and just
mhm.
needs to hear students' stories as I was able to and gifted to have the opportunity to hear those stories and experience those relationships. I just want that for everyone. And that's really what fuels and drives me to do what I do every day.
Courtney, okay, seriously. Um, I'm going to need to ask you permission right now to use that perspectives that have not blossomed. That is such a beautiful way of putting it because I feel that, I mean, it's true for all of us, right? And I know that for myself, I would like people to offer me grace. Right? I want them to have a glass half full, a growth mindset, a like, okay, let me give her the benefit of the doubt. And of course, it can be very challenging to do when you are faced with bias and stereotypes and like racism and all of those things, like extremely challenging. But it's it's important to do if we're actually going to truly create a classroom culture that we want, but really a school culture that we want because it starts with the teachers and
Yeah.
them creating an environment between themselves that then like runs over to the students because of course as a classroom teacher you can have major impact, right? But
Yeah.
like doing that in connection to your other colleagues, oh my gosh, amazing. So I love how you just put that. But I do, and so I want to ask you another question. But before we get further down the line here, so you are an expert in helping gen ed teachers and ESL teachers to really be able to help their students, right? To empower their multilingual students. But what is a multilingual learner? Like, can you give us a definition of what that means?
Yeah, so it's been kind of this there's this history of this evolution, if you will, of terms that we've used to refer to these students. And for a long time we just called them the ESL kids. English as a second language, and then people realized, oh, for lots of these learners, it's their third, fourth language. Um, and I think the probably still remaining the most prominent term is English learners, right? However, there's a great, wonderful movement towards referring to these students as multilingual learners in an effort to really emphasize the asset that they have of being multilingual, of speaking more than one language. What an incredible skill set that is to have, rather than kind of this monolingual focus of learning English. That's the main goal. Kind of elevating the the asset that they bring of learning two languages at once. How cool is that? Let's call them multilingual learners. So, within multilingual learners, we have students who are emerging English learners who are first learning English. We have students who, maybe they speak English, fairly well, but maybe they speak a different language at home, or their parents only speak an additional language other than English. And there's this broad spectrum of students' backgrounds and cultures and linguistic histories and English proficiency. All of these students we can refer to as multilingual learners.
Okay, that is so good to know. And honestly, like, I need to shift my wording, right? Like, I definitely, even when I asked you the question, I said ESL students. So, because I think that there is so much programming, and like you said, I mean, these are the terms that we are used to using. And I guess I'm pretty sure when I did the add-on for my master's, it was called an ESL add-on. But many of my students, I know for a fact, spoke more than one, two, three languages, right? So I love that, how we are trying to like reshape and reframe our thinking. And you know what else I like about that is what you were talking about as far as like looking at things with like a positive lens.
Hmm.
And so many times there are connotations around words, and the connotation could be more negative or more positive. And I think by us saying like English as a second language, or an ESL student, I don't even know why, but I feel like it has more of like a negative connotation, like, oh, this person, this da 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 da. And it's like, no, they're literally learning a whole other language, and you probably don't even have one,
Right.
gotten together. And so, but saying like a multilingual learner, I feel like that has like such a great connotation. So thank you for really giving us that definition. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, because obviously like this podcast, I'm focusing on creating an inclusive and welcoming classroom for all students. And so that's not one of the reasons why I started the podcast, was because I feel like so many times there is this idea of, when you say the word culture, that it's race and
Hmm.
probably ethnicity, right? But like race is so big, and especially in the United States, right? Race is everything. If it's not black, it's white. And if it's not white, it's black. And like we can't seem to get out of this little box.
Right.
But like culture is so much more than that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why I started the podcast, right? Because I wanted to look at this idea of culture in a much larger sense, and how tapping into the beautiful nuances of our students' cultures, and honestly even our own, can really add to the learning experience. So what and you said that when you were ready to get to college, because you felt like you were really ready to learn about different people and different experiences, but like everyone is not that way, Courtney. So I mean, what was it that opened your heart and opened your mind? I think to myself about the process that I had to go through
Yeah.
to kind of even get myself to a place where I was open to
Yeah.
understanding different perspectives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think again, I always, you know, one of my big priorities in my day-to-day teaching job and in my business is to approach my colleagues with kindness, with respect, with assuming positive intentions, and grace, right? And because I don't think a whole lot can be accomplished, honestly, if we don't start from that place. And what's interesting, what I find about educators, and I think this is common knowledge, is we love kids. That's why we do what we do. We want to help kids and help them grow and support them. But unfortunately, I think a lot of educators, 80% of whom are white, were like myself, raised with certain limited understandings. And it's not something that many people choose to, you know, think this way or have certain uh closed-minded thought patterns, but the fact is that they're there, right? And for myself, what broke those open was relationship. It was making genuine heart connections with other individuals. It was having those moments where I saw something beautiful in them and said, wow, I wasn't expecting that, but that just seriously, you know, hit some heartstrings in me and brought about a change, not just in my heart, but in my mind. And it changed my thinking, and it just rips up assumptions, right? And I tell people all the time who, are in my community, replace assumptions with clarifying questions,
Mm,
because I think the root of the inequities that we have is assumptions that we make because of the thought patterns we were raised in, right? The biases we were raised in. The only way to get rid of those assumptions is, as I said before, information, facts, knowledge, understanding about who people are. And so, such a big part of that is listening to the stories of our individual students. And when we're able to hear those stories, that's where we make that heart connection. That's where
yeah.
we can look at them as individuals and say, "Oh, wow. Okay, my thinking just changed. And now I can be more open and prepared to make instructional decisions that are sound and appropriate and relevant to my learners." It's a game changer. But it has to start with an educator who's willing to open their heart and their mind to new relationships, even if that means getting a little uncomfortable, being willing to learn something new, diving into the unknown, if you will. Um, but I think once we go there and let ourselves go there and find relationship there, it's such
Mhm.
a fulfilling thing as a teacher. So, I don't know, just some thoughts. That's just been my personal experience.
Absolutely. But like you just said, sharing stories, and I say this all the time, like sharing stories is what helps to build bridges of empathy. Because so many times, especially now, I feel like there is a huge movement for the inclusion of social and emotional learning teaching practices and strategies, which is hugely important. And one of the like key components is developing and building empathy. But how do you do that? It's not something that like can just be taught. People have to you have to feel that thing.
Right.
And sharing your story is it's amazing. And I love that that you are so open to just sharing what your experience was. And I also love the fact that you and I have something in common. That, I mean, we have other things too, but just like this one thing where you said you felt like it was having authentic and genuine relationships, right? Like opening your heart to real relationships, because honestly, that is what did it for me as well, right? Like sitting down and talking with people, like with a genuine ear to hear what they have to say, not just stepping in, oh, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to, okay, let me hear what she has to say, but then you're not actually hearing them, right? You're listening, but you're not hearing.
Right.
And so I love that. And I have to share what you said about your definition of of culture, you said that, because I said, like, what is your definition of culture? And you said, if a connected group of people were to be represented by a painting, their culture is comprised of the unique brushstrokes that make the painting beautiful and unique. It is the doings, but more so the thinking, the beliefs and values of this people group that define their culture. Courtney, I almost cried. Okay. Like when I read that definition, I seriously almost cried. I was like, that is so beautiful. Like it's such a, I mean, you are painting a picture with your words. And
I
honestly,
was
like I feel
getting
like,
a little poetic there at 11 p.m.
well, you were, but I felt like I got to know you even more just by asking that question. So what you said
Mm,
about don't just make assumptions, right? Ask clarifying questions. Just ask. Like sometimes people are gonna be offended by the question that you ask, or maybe they won't answer it, right? But like you can say that you asked, right?
yeah.
Like, and you asked with a genuinely authentic desire to to hear
Yeah.
the answer and engage in the conversation.
And what's
So
challenging with our multilingual learners, sometimes people are like, well, I want to get to know them, but they don't speak any English. Well, friends, there are ways around that. Fortunately, in our day and age, we have some incredible technology tools that enable us to speak directly with students through these translation tools. Did I just say technology tools? Translation tools. Sorry, it's been a long day. But there's ways around it. And also if we really care about pursuing information, there's colleagues we can speak to who already know our students potentially well. There's parents, families we can connect with, again, through interpreters, through tech tools. And we can gain a wealth of information just by having conversations with students, families. So, I never want, oh, well, I just don't speak their language, so I can't talk to them. I don't want that to be an obstacle that keeps us from learning the students' stories and knowing them and understanding them, because they're more than what we are expecting. Like their stories are often so much richer. Their interests and skill sets are all often so much more just intricate than we can even imagine. And it just takes a little extra oomph of curiosity to go there.
mhm. Yes. Yes. I love it. I mean, I can't, I'm smiling from ear to ear because I love it. And I feel like what you're saying resonates so deeply when we're thinking about culturally relevant and culturally responsive pedagogy, right? It's about connecting with the students so that they are able to thrive. And because as educators, we do have, we do love and care for students, but love and caring, those are action words. So it's not just about saying that I love this student, right? It's about the action. So for a gen ed teacher like myself, you already mentioned that there are translation tools. And I mean, honestly, as you said, you've been in the classroom for a long time, right? I've been in education for 17 years. These tools were not out when we first got into the classroom, but Google and all the like, so we've got translation tools. And I remember on your Instagram, you did a reel that talked about the difference between, I think it was the difference between an interpreter and a translator. Is that what it
Hmm.
was?
Yeah.
So so can you go ahead and run that definition and then
Words that are often kind of used interchangeably, but so translation is uh, text, and interpretation or interpreters is spoken language, oral language. Just
perfect.
something to differentiate.
Yes, which we
Um,
need to do. So then, okay, so now that I know that, what are some ways, I don't know, like maybe like what are your top three strategies or tips for gen ed teachers who have multilingual learners in their classroom?
yeah, it's interesting because I'm here at the beginning of the school year, have been in conversations a lot with teachers who are overwhelmed because maybe they have a newcomer in their class and they really want to be able to do right by the student and build that relationship. And they see the frustration or the confusion on their student's face, and it is overwhelming. It's kind of the worst feeling ever when you're in that spot and you feel helpless and hopeless and you don't know what strategies to use, right? And I will say, again, with the growth mindset, it's a journey. It takes time to learn the skills and strategies to meet the needs of these students well. So you have to start by giving yourself some grace and breathe and relax a little bit. And to know that if you have that safe, inclusive community, that's the best start you can give them, because you're providing a place where that student, at least at minimum, knows that they're appreciated and loved and safe. Um, but you know, I always say start by getting rid of the I'm a silo mindset and reach out. You know, there are specialists, language specialists, and colleagues that you can tap into for resources and support. You know, some schools have a co-teaching model where there's teachers working side by side in the classroom, and then there's teachers who, you know, perhaps it's a low incidence district where their ESL teachers spread very thin across multiple schools in some cases, not very present, unfortunately. So, you know, just tapping into whatever resources are available there. But then also for gen ed teachers, understanding too that it's it's also upon them, it's their responsibility as well to see themselves as also a language teacher, as being there to support not just the content learning, but also the language learning for the students in their class, which, if you think about it, all the students in their class are learners of academic language. So it's, you know, it's a pretty good thing to grow your ability to teach language in the classroom. And that's something that I focus on a lot, in my course, and then things that I do is like helping teachers understand, where is the language already in your classroom? Where are your learners, since you know them really well, wink wink, right? You know them really well, you know where their language proficiency levels are, you know, kind of obstacles that might crop up in the middle of a lesson, and you're able to think constructively about ways that you can reduce that language barrier by making some simple tweaks to the ways that you present content, to the ways that you assess the students, things like this. So, you know, communicating with colleagues, understanding and really owning that, you know, this is upon me to find out ways, what are ways that I can help the student access my instruction, because they have a legal right to that, to equitable access to my instruction, right? Um, and you know, I guess the other thing, which we've already talked about, is just to build relationships and really get to know those students, because they, you know, if we look at their holistic needs, it's really when we look at the entire picture and try to bring clarity to that picture, that we are able to make the best decisions that are informed, decisions, you know, when it comes to that student. I often see, unfortunately, you know, colleagues making decisions without having that picture complete. And unfortunately, sometimes they're, you know, decisions that have a negative impact on students' learning, or aren't entirely inclusive, of the, you know, the students in the academic setting. So those are some of my big encouragements to gen ed teachers.
I think that those are great. Those are great pieces of advice. I know that in the districts where I worked, we did, and like in the schools where I taught, we did have, you know, a dedicated ELL teacher, and our students were able to be pulled out of certain classes to get some additional instruction. And I, you know, clearly that is not necessarily something that maybe every school has access to. Is that what you're saying? Like some schools do not have a dedicated ELL teacher, multilingual.
I think the longer that I engage with my broader community, of gen ed teachers and EL specialists, ML specialists, if you will, the more I come to understand that schools in our nation are on such a broad spectrum of
Mhm.
how they provide support services. So when I'm, you know, coaching a colleague, I really have to ask a lot of questions to find out, you know, how many grade levels are you working with? How many teachers are you supporting? What does your model look like? Is it a model where you are taking students out of the gen ed classroom setting, or are you providing in-class support? Are you able to plan with your colleagues in advance? What are the resources you have? How much administrator support do you have to provide the infrastructure that you are needing to make your instruction effective for these students? And that's a big piece, now that I think about it, a big piece of my advocacy work is around infrastructure. It's
Mm.
around helping to broaden awareness of how multilingual learners uniquely receive information and instruction, which is different, right, from students with, say, learning disabilities, very different. Um, Building advocacy around that, and also what is needed to make effective supports happen in a given school. And there's so many factors. How our teachers trained or certified to work with multilingual learners, how much planning time is available, um, are there professional development resources available, like all of these things come into play when you're talking about what your program model needs to look like. But I think the majority of schools have some work that could be done, shall we say.
Right. Yeah. Well, I definitely, I see now that for the schools where I worked, we obviously seemed to have some pretty good resources in place, because at one of the schools I co-taught with the EL teacher for one class where, I don't know, the administration felt like they wanted to just put the majority of the EL students in the classroom, which I'm not really sure if that's best practices or not. But I mean, it worked out. I mean, all of my students actually really preferred it. They were just like, "Oh, this is really cool," because da da da, and whatever else. So, but it worked out well. But the fact that I had her in the classroom with me as a support, I mean, it was a game changer. Like, I was like, okay, sure, yes, I don't. This is great. Like, I love being able to support my multilingual students, but as I said, like, just because I had that ESL add-on, I didn't feel like I was fully equipped to be able to do that. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show is because, again, like, when I'm working with teachers and administrators and I'm leading workshops and I'm talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, my one of my main goals is shifting the perspective, right, and helping to kind of let that perspective blossom around what it means to be culturally relevant and culturally responsive. It's not just a race and an ethnicity thing, right? It's about your beliefs, your behaviors, your ways of being, the way that you show up in the classroom. And that means creating an inclusive and a welcoming environment for all of your students. That is what culturally relevant pedagogy is all about. And so bringing you on the show, I feel like that's going to help to connect some dots between, oh, culturally relevant pedagogy and supporting my multilingual learners. Like, yes, those are one and the same, right? All of the
Absolutely.
tools that we need. And also, so one of the other things that you mentioned, students with different learning disabilities, if we will, or learning uniquenesses,
Mhm.
that is a totally different and separate entity. And I do feel like maybe that's what I was getting at when I was saying that when we had that phrasing of English as a second language, I feel like it almost made it seem like it was a disability. And I mean, I hate to say it, but like, I feel like that was the connotation, like, oh, well, this student, they're learning English as a second language, so we better. And it's like, they're not. They know how to talk. They know how to engage and communicate. And I mean, obviously, depending on the age, right? If you're dealing with a kindergartner or preschooler, then they may or may not know how to read. Okay, but like, in general, like, they are intelligent. So let's not look at this student and say, oh, because no, actually, their brain and their synapses are firing at a much faster rate than yours. Okay, like,
Absolutely.
there are so many different pathways that are connecting that may never connect in your mind because you do not tap into the beauty of learning a second language. But um, oh gosh, there was something else, another connection I wanted to make.
That's so good.
Uh, I can't remember what it was. I know what it was. So in general, especially when I'm talking with gen ed teachers, and we've got our special education teachers in the classroom, it's like in the presentation, right? Because it's for everybody who's sitting in this workshop. It's like, hey, how can we work together, not just to help our special education students learn how to thrive in a quote traditional setting, right? Or if we have students that have like physical ability needs,
Mhm.
oh well, we really need to help this child that has autism, that's on the spectrum, learn how to engage in a typical world. But what about our quote typical and traditional students? When are they learning to also, right? Those are those bridges of empathy, because guess what, it's not just your world. This is
Right.
our world. All of us are included. And so I need to be learning how to, as someone who speaks only English as my first and only language, right? How do I build bridges of empathy to people that are learning English as their second, third, or fourth language? And how do I see that as a gift, as
Yeah.
like an opportunity?
Yeah. I know, I love it. I think, so often there's little microaggressions, as we call them, just the little things, the little subtle comments made, the little, the look that you might give, or the short answer that you might give, or oh, I don't have time for this, or well, I don't have time to deal with that. I mean, these are things that teachers, even recently, I've been told, have said. I'm like,
Mhm.
um but if we can shift that and perhaps flip it over and have micro affirmations, as I like to call
Ooh,
them,
yes, yes.
little ways that we say, "Hey, teach me a new word in your language, maybe one every day, and then I'll learn. You teach me." Or allow the student to share something in their home language. If they're still just emerging in their knowledge of English, celebrating that, "Hey, you're pretty darn smart and great at sharing things and presenting things in your primary language. Let's give you that opportunity," right? Um, Cultural things like noticing a greeting they have, noticing a religious holiday that they're celebrating and practicing with their family, asking about that, taking interest in it. These are those little tiny things. Posting flags of the countries that your students represent in your room. Those little tiny things go way farther than we even can imagine when it comes to helping our students feel included and supported in the classroom. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I tell teachers all the time, like, start small, start with a little, one step at a time. You don't need to know the full gamut of instructional scaffolds for your English learners. You don't have to jump to the ones that take all the time in the world. Just start with little ones. Start by just
Mhm.
slowing down your rate of speech. Maybe drawing
Mhm.
some little doodles on the board as you're talking. These are easy things, right? But they go a long way toward making our multilingual learners perk up and say, "Oh, well, I get that. Well, now I feel like I'm included in this lesson. Pretty cool," right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Showing them
Mhm.
how to use a translation tool on their Chromebook. Like, it could be these really simple things that make massive impact for our learners. So I try to encourage teachers, don't feel like you have to know everything, and be great at all the strategies at once. Just start small and you'll grow over time.
Absolutely right. It's again blossoming. I just, I mean, I feel like hearing you share these things, I am thankful for, I think, just some of my natural intuition that I had, and my heart for building relationships and wanting to connect with my students. Because as you're saying some of these things, I'm thinking, okay, you know what? I did do some of these things. And I'm just like, it's not to be like, oh, I'm amazing. It's just like, I'm thankful for my students, right? I'm thankful, like, okay, I did some things that really did connect with them. I mean, like you were talking about the greetings. I would sit with a student who spoke Spanish and spoke English really well, and I would say, hey, I want to be able to communicate with my students that are coming into the classroom. Like literally, I remember, oh my gosh, I remember I got a student, the very morning. He had probably gotten there the day before. The student let me, the office let me know that very morning, like, hey, such and such is coming to your classroom. He literally just got here from Puerto Rico. And I was like, Okay, wonderful, fantastic. And I said, listen, I know that the child I was talking to, I was like, I know that you are Mexican American and this child here is Puerto Rican. And so there are going to be some differences in your dialect, right? Like your different slangs and all of this, but just give me some basic Spanish words. Because I mean, I took Spanish in high school, right? But none of it really stuck. I was like, give me some words because I want to be able to communicate with my students. And they loved it. And when that student came in and I introduced myself and I told him my name, and then just little things like you said, like I'd be like, okay, like I would say like levante la mano, right? Like, okay, oh, I know that. Okay, raise my hand, or
Mhm.
just like little things that I would say, little phrases. And then my students that only spoke English, they were like, oh, like that's cool. Can I also like learn some Spanish as well? And so that I would hear my students having conversations with each other about, well, tell me how to say this, right? Well, okay, well, how do I say that?
Mhm.
And they were like teaching each other. So the fact that I opened up that space, like you said, to make it safe, then
Yeah.
now my students on both sides and on all the sides felt brave enough to open themselves up to learn as well.
Mm,
Ooh, oh
I
my gosh.
love that. Yes, because
Courtney.
and we know, like, language learning can't take place in a context where students aren't willing to take risks, where their affective filter is up to here. Ain't no language learning gonna happen in a situation like that. So, again, it just has to start with building that culture of care, you know? Um,
Mhm.
and it takes time and it takes effort,
It
and
was.
it can be
Oh,
challenging, but
but
it's
you said
worth it.
small steps, and it
Yeah.
is worth it. And so, one small step that anyone that is listening today can take is to first follow you on Instagram if they do not already follow you. So, I want you to share all the ways that teachers can find you. How can they connect with you? Do you have any like resources, any free resources that they might be able to snag? And I mean, I heard you talking about some courses that you offer. Like, please, like, talk to us about ways that we as gen ed teachers, but also I know that I have some teachers that are listening that are like world language teachers. Like, this is good for everyone. So talk to us.
Yeah, I do I do a lot on Instagram. It's kind of like my fun little hobby, if you will. But I like sharing a lot of what I'm learning through Instagram also. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook at the All Access Classroom. No dashes or spaces. I do have a website. It's www.theallaccessclassroom.com. Um, my big joy is my course, which is called All Access Instruction. And I really focus in on the instructional piece for teachers who need to make content accessible. What does that look like? Where do I get started? How do I understand my students' proficiency levels in English? How do I scaffold? What does that look like? What does that even mean? So we go through all of that. And I'm also beginning to offer some workshops, some professional development workshops for schools and districts that are interested in kind of just equipping teachers further. Because I know our amazing EL specialists, ML specialists are often very stretched thin, and often some PD is called for and needed. So I wanted to make myself available for that as well. But yeah, I love my little community. We have some fun and share the ups and downs together, and of course our common love for multilingual learners. So if you're interested in that, hop over and join me. It's fun.
Perfect, perfect. I again, um, Courtney has a really easy way in as far as like her disposition and the way that she presents and the way that she shares information. And at least for myself, that is how I am most receptive is to someone like sharing it in a way that also is offering me grace and allowing me and like giving me permission to take that risk. So thank you for what it is that you share on Instagram and on Facebook. And definitely, like, as I said, like all of this stuff connects together, right? So if you are someone who has been listening to my podcast for 2 seasons now, because we're on season 2 right now at the time that this episode has been recorded. But if you've been listening for these 2 seasons, then you are a lot more well versed in cultural competency and cultural relevance and all of those things. And this idea of creating a welcoming and inclusive classroom, like one piece of that is to kind of reflect on who you are and the things that you need. And then the next piece of that is to get out there and learn, like learn about the tools and the strategies that are going to support yourself and then the learners that you have in your classroom. So Courtney is a resource. She is someone who can equip you with strategies. Like she gave us a few tips today, but there are so many more. So again, I really want to say thank you, Courtney, for coming onto the podcast today. It was truly an honor to talk to you. Like you're an amazing educator, and I'm just really thankful that you are in my space.
Oh my goodness. It's been such a joy. I love you, and it's just fun to
Oh.
talk about, things that I'm passionate about, things that matter to me with people that are like-minded and like-hearted, and you're definitely one of those people, and I appreciate you and the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Yay, 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 yay. Well, all right, we are going to close here, but you always know that I will be back next Wednesday with either a solo or a guest episode. But, we're mixing it up now, so you better come back and find out. See you later.
Bye.